Jerusalem, early morning. The streets lie in deep sleep, but behind the scenes, the chaos had already begun. A trial was underway, one where the sentence came before the evidence, where the accused was condemned before he could even speak. And the court? A twisted game of alliances, betrayal, and fear. The most unjust trial in human memory didn't happen in broad daylight, but in the shadows, where religion and politics mixed like poison, desperate to silence a threat. The rules were ignored, and principles distorted. Here, three forces collide, each playing its hand, each with something to lose, and at the center of it all, a man who knew exactly what was about to unfold. In the next few minutes, you'll see how hidden agendas sealed the fate of a man whose life split the timeline of history in two, before and after him. And no, this wasn't just an execution, it was a cruel, calculated strategy, and without them realizing it, prophetic. You won't want to miss what happens at the end, because once everything becomes clear, the last person you'd suspect might just turn out to be the one most responsible for it all, and the unavoidable question will follow: who's really on trial? Jerusalem seemed calm under the scorching sun, but behind Roman columns and religious robes, an ancient game was quietly unfolding. The empire ruled with an iron fist, but not without diplomacy. Peace was nothing more than a thin veneer over a powder keg. Rome knew, ruling such a devout people required more than soldiers. So it gave space to the religious leaders, as long as order was preserved, and these leaders, instead of resisting, learned to bargain with the enemy. An uncomfortable alliance, but an effective one. At the center of this chessboard, three figures moved with almost choreographed precision. Pilate, the Roman governor, stood for imperial force, yet was a hostage to politics. His pragmatism masked the constant fear of a negative report reaching the emperor's ears. Herod Antipas, a puppet king, craved admiration. His vanity made him fickle, vulnerable, and easily manipulated. And Caiaphas, the high priest, was the true architect of stability. A cold strategist who saw beyond the temple and the altar. To him, any threat to order was a personal threat. The Sanhedrin, the council of the wise, no longer judged with neutrality. Quiet meetings began to take place, doors locked, guards on watch. Hidden alliances formed, far from the people's gaze. Something was moving, and the urgency to silence dissenting voices grew alongside the murmurs in the streets. The city breathed tension, but no one knew exactly where it came from. Only those seated at the table of power understood what was at stake, and maybe not even they imagined that between one conspiracy and the next, they were about to set a machine in motion that once started, would never stop, and its spark would come from the most unexpected place. When an entire city becomes hostage to the silence of its leaders, night is no longer just the end of the day, it becomes the perfect stage for what cannot be done in the light. In Gethsemane, a garden outside the city walls and beyond the reach of the crowds, something was unfolding. There, away from the eyes and outside the rules, the plan advanced. Judas, a familiar face among the 11, led the guards with precision and urgency. There was no hesitation. His arrival wasn't a surprise to the one who had already foretold the gesture, but the timing was. A kiss would seal the fate. Why now? Why like this? It was night, dark and cold. Jesus had his head covered, both to pray and to shield himself from the chill. That made identifying him harder. Judas knew that, and to be sure it was truly Christ, not a disciple, the kiss would reveal him. For everything to go as planned, daylight had to be avoided, so did the people, and the questions. Everything had to happen before the followers noticed, before the streets filled with voices rising in defense of a name that was already dividing the city. The night arrest was strategic and illegal by Jewish law, which required trials to be public and based on recognized witnesses, but in that early morning hour, legality was the least of their concerns. The target wasn't a crime, it was the accused. Justice wasn't what they were after, and in the muffled echo of hurried footsteps, more than just the law was being broken, the veil of neutrality still covering that scheme began to tear. In the wake of the torches, something darker than the night was taking shape. No outcry, no resistance, just deliberate steps toward an ending already decided, and by sunrise, the trial would already be underway, even without a courtroom, even without a defense. Before the sun rose on the horizon, certain corridors were already busy. No public announcement, no trumpet blast, just urgency and closed doors. In Caiaphas's house, the trial began long before the city awakened. It was a theater, not a court. The seats were already filled, the rolls assigned, and the sentence signed before the first question was asked. Witnesses came forward, but their stories didn't match. Contradictions piled up, the accusations were weak and disconnected, the legal chaos was obvious, but no one seemed concerned with fixing it. That meeting wasn't about finding the truth, it was about finding a justification. After a brief silence, a direct question. "Are you the Son of the blessed God?" And then, an unflinching answer. "I am." It wasn't just an answer, it was a spark that ignited the room. Eyes darted, robes tore, voices rose, not because they didn't understand what he was saying, but because of what that claim threatened. It wasn't religious delusion, it was a challenge to the very structure that upheld the temple and its leaders. Caiaphas didn't react like a judge, he reacted like a man whose control had just been threatened. His outburst wasn't for justice, it was for survival. To protect the nation, they said, to prevent chaos, to stop Rome from stepping in. But there, in the middle of that early morning, what they were truly defending was their own power. Religion had become both shield and sword, and as dawn drew near, the room still echoed with the weight of a rehearsed accusation. What came next would require no further argument, the goal was now execution, and no one in that room showed the slightest intent to hesitate. The day had barely begun, and there was already a prisoner standing at the door of the praetorium. He wasn't in chains, nor did he resist, he came in silence, because he already knew the verdict. Pilate wasn't expecting this so early. The Roman governor was a man of numbers, not moral dilemmas. His job was to maintain order, suppress unrest, and make sure his name never reached Rome attached to a problem, but the man standing before him defied understanding. No guilt could be found, no clear threat, no arrogance in his posture, on the contrary, a disarming calm. Pilate questioned him, but it felt as if he were the one being examined. With each answer, the discomfort grew. Behind the scenes, the trap was tightening. The religious leaders didn't want a trial, they wanted a sentence, and they applied pressure with a calculated threat. "If you let him go, you're no friend of Caesar." This strategic and provocative accusation made Jesus guilty not only in their eyes, but also under Roman law, for claiming to be a king. Otherwise, Pilate would have had no reason to be involved in a Jewish religious matter. So this was no longer about justice, now, it was about keeping his position, keeping his head, choosing between what was right and what was safe, between conscience and convenience. As the exchange went on, one statement from Jesus stood out. "Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." And then came the thundering question. What is truth? It didn't come from the reflective silence of a just judge. It came from the internal collapse of a man overwhelmed by pressures he couldn't contain. Standing before him was a prisoner with no defense, no fear, no urgency, but above all, someone who didn't fit into any of his political strategies, and that was terrifying. Pilate understood the game of power. He knew how to twist words, read threats, predict consequences, but here, nothing worked. Every answer Jesus gave pushed him further into a moral abyss, because the answer to his question didn't need to be explained or defined. It was standing right in front of him, embodied in a man, and it simply had to be recognized. The question wasn't philosophical, it was a suffocated cry, the confession of a man who saw, with disturbing clarity, that he was about to condemn someone whose only crime was to exist as a witness to the truth, and truth, when it cannot be manipulated, is terrifying. The right question, the right moment, but the courage never came. In that moment, Pilate walked away, not as one who abstains, but as one who gives in, and since then, that question hasn't stopped echoing. What is truth, when everyone has something to lose? Pilate's attempt to escape the dilemma led him to an unusual move, sending the prisoner to Herod Antipas. After all, it was Herod's jurisdiction. A diplomatic gesture, a passing of responsibility, and a chance to avoid deciding alone. Herod was expecting a show. He wanted to see miracles, hear cryptic phrases, witness something extraordinary. He expected this man, famous for signs and wonders, to perform some kind of magic before his eyes, but what he got was silence. Jesus didn't say a word, he didn't answer questions, he performed no miracles, he simply looked at him, as if seeing straight through him, a gaze without fear, without pleading, without any effort to defend himself. Herod grew irritated. He tried to mock him, dressed the prisoner up like a king and sent him back as a joke. His mockery was just an attempt to mask the discomfort he felt in the face of that unshakable silence. The encounter was no accident. Faced with Herod's empty power, Jesus remained silent, refusing to play the part the monarch wanted, entertainment. Still, the message was received. Herod and Pilate became allies once again. The exchange of favors revived old political ties. The politicians were pleased, justice was overlooked, and while one returned the silent man and the other received him with hesitation, the machinery kept turning. There was no going back, the outcome was already set, the stage for this performance was fully prepared, and the next act would unfold without masks, in front of a crowd about to choose who they truly identified with. The decision landed back in Pilate's hands, but by then, there was no real choice left, only the ritual of appearances. To Roman eyes, a symbolic gesture was enough, washing one's hands, declaring oneself clean, shifting the burden. That's what Pilate did, publicly, in front of everyone. A calculated act meant to look like justice, when in truth, it was surrender. The crowd, now inflamed, was already shouting a name, not the name of the accused, but of another. A man arrested for rebellion, known for violence, and infamous for threatening public order, Barabbas. Why choose him? Why release a criminal with blood on his hands instead of an innocent man with truth on his lips? The answer lies not only in the manipulation of the religious leaders, but in fear. In the longing to see strength where hope had failed. Barabbas represented action, Jesus, conversation, and many would rather choose conflict, even destructive, than a voice that confronts them from within. The basin of water was brought, the hands moved, and in that public gesture, the entire empire washed itself of responsibility, without ever truly being free from it. Pilate knew what he was doing, but he chose to let others decide. The crowd made its choice, and he simply sealed it. The chosen name echoed through the streets, and from that moment on, the innocent one walked a path where laws would no longer protect him, only nail him to an instrument of execution, meant for those the system couldn't silence any other way. There was no twist, no last-minute revelation to change the course. What looked like a trial was, from the beginning, nothing more than the staging of a sentence already written. Nothing said or done that morning had the power to change the outcome, because the verdict had already been stitched together in hidden meetings, quiet pacts, and agreements made far from the crowds. The courtroom was just the final act of a scheme crafted to look fair, but function as an execution. From the secret arrest to Pilate's false dilemma, everything followed a script where legality was merely for show. The rules were ignored, trials at night, no consistent witnesses, unusual haste. There was no defense, only political convenience and religious fear, an entire system mobilized for its own preservation. Religion, which should safeguard truth, was used as a tool, and justice, which should protect the innocent, remained silent. What played out was a terrible theater, and the applause came from those who had the most to lose if truth were heard. The sentence wasn't written that morning, it already existed, hidden, camouflaged, protected by robes and titles, and no one there seemed willing to stop it. What remained now was ritual, a ritual to preserve a system, and at the center of it all, a man walked forward without resistance, knowing this was the only path that could lead to true justice. In that moment, something greater than the crowd's screams and the silence of the powerful was being set in motion. What looked like the end of everything was actually the beginning of a justice no courtroom could ever deliver. The cross wasn't an accident. It was not the crowning of earthly glory, but of divine redemption. Jesus wasn't defeated. He gave himself, fully aware, with authority, to fulfill what only he could fulfill. Every step up to that point was his choice. And us? How many times do we sit in those same invisible courts? We judge in haste, condemn based on appearances, silence whatever confronts us. Like Pilate, we choose convenience. Like Caiaphas, we protect power and influence. Like Herod, we seek spectacle. But what if today, the one on trial is the truth itself? And what if it stands before us, without defense, without image, without alliances? What will we do with it? It's easy to criticize the characters in this story. What's hard is recognizing when we're standing in their place. But here's the good news. The same God who once wore a cross is now clothed in glory and majesty, and he doesn't demand perfection, just repentance. He's not looking for merit. He offers grace, and yes, there's still time to choose which side of the story we want to be on. If this content moved you in any way, don't ignore what it stirred up. Like this video, and then leave a comment sharing what it made you think about. That helps YouTube know what you enjoy and show you more content like this, intense, honest, and life-changing. And if something inside you still hasn't settled, keep going. There's another video linked in the description and at the end screen that'll take you to another powerful story. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. So tell me, if you were in the place of Pilate, Caiaphas, or Herod, what would you do? The cross wasn't the end of the road, it was the turning point. The symbol of humanity's greatest failure became the mark of God's greatest victory, and those who grasp this carry something the world can neither give nor take away, the unshakable truth that the final word always belongs to grace.